Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our Friday Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everyone's having a great week and looking forward to a fun Labor Day weekend. And again, as I always say, stay hydrated and use that sunblock. I've talked to more than a few people over the past few years that have had issues with their skin, cancer related, because of too much sun exposure. So I'm really cognizant of that, and I try to share that with folks like my listeners. So we're going to go over three different completely diverse topics today. We're going to go over a little bit about sports at the beginning because we had some big news that took place over the last couple days. We're going to go over, obviously, some real estate highlights. And then we're going to go over kind of what I refer to as decisions that affect all of us in the United States. And I'll say more about it, obviously, when I get to it. But if you keep doing the same things and things continually don't work out, why would you continue to do the same thing? So I'll discuss that on part 3. So we'll start off with the portion about sports. Well, the biggest news by far over the last couple days is in the NFL. They had 3 well-known players that had not signed their contracts that were top players with their individual teams. So Terry McLaurin, the star receiver of the Washington Commanders, he signed his contract first part of this week. So now the Redskins have their full complement of players, and hopefully their star quarterback from last year, Jaden Daniels, will continue his upward ascent. The second one was Ted Hendrickson of the Cincinnati Bengals. He was probably the most underpaid player in football of the top quality players that were eligible for new salaries. When I say eligible, when you're on a rookie contract, you're kind of stuck with signing a 4-year contract. And because they're at a much lower rate, almost never do those contracts get boosted until at least they've completed year 3. But this player had been in the league, 8 or 9 years, and was underpaid by millions, literally. And the Cincinnati Bengals are known for their frugality, and that's one of the reasons why they've never won a Super Bowl. Well, anyway, they finally came to a compromise of sorts, so they gave him a huge raise, so he signed a contract earlier this week. But he signed only a 1-year deal because, for their own reasons, they didn't want to guarantee him more money because he's 30 years old. Even though for you and me, 30 years old is not old, but from football parlance, they consider players in their early 30s to be headed toward the downward descent, so they don't like guaranteeing them a lot of money. So the good thing for Hendrickson is, after this 1 year, he'll be a free agent, which means that if he has another good year, he'll have a lot of teams competing to sign him at a great financial boost to him. So there's a good possibility he'll be leaving the Bengals at the end of the 2025-26 season. And last but not least, which is the most famous situation, is Micah Parsons. He's the star end rusher, linebacker, defensive end, however you want to categorize him, for the Dallas Cowboys. He made the Pro Bowl team in his first 4 years and had tremendous seasons all 4 years and was a model player from what we know. He never got into trouble. The other players liked him. He kept his nose clean off the field. And so at his position, they've given out some really high-priced contracts this year. Well, he and the owner, Jerry Jones, had a difference of opinion. It's a he said, she said thing. But the bottom line is it seemed like a clash of egos, that Jerry Jones is this wealthy, older businessman who's used to getting his own way and looks at the people that work for him as kind of beneath him, and they should be appreciative of what he does for them. So long story short, they ended up trading him last night, which people had talked about him being traded, but I don't think anybody really believed he would be traded, because it's very unusual in professional sports for a star player to be traded when he's still a younger player, because he's still reaching his prime, so he's got a lot of good years left in him. But nonetheless, they traded him for some future draft capital and then a defensive lineman, and he was traded to the Green Bay Packers. So it's speculated that what that trade has done is it's made Green Bay even more of a contender this year. Now they're ranked as one of the top 3 teams in the NFC to go to the Super Bowl. And from the Dallas standpoint, their projections weren't nearly as lofty this year, so a lot of the experts didn't even feel they'd make the playoffs in 2025-26. But now with the loss of Micah Parsons, it's even less likely that they're going to have a good year. And so the Dallas fans, I'm sure most of them are not too happy with this deal. And we'll just have to see where it goes. Jerry Jones is doing typical spinning or rationalizing, kind of like what a politician would do when certain decisions they make are not popular. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see. So remember that name, Micah Parsons, Green Bay Packers, Dallas Cowboys. The other part of sports that's I'll give a little bit of a shout out to, in professional baseball, the major leagues, there are 2 players in particular that are having completely noteworthy seasons. One is Cal Raleigh for the Seattle Mariners. He's got 50 home runs already this year. He's a switch hitter, so he's going to set a record very possibly for switch hitters. And he's a catcher, which is what makes this more unlikely. He's actually set a record for the most home runs by a catcher in one season. And catching is a very difficult position. It puts a lot more wear and tear on your body. So when you're comparing players' performances, it's much harder to be a catcher and maintain this consistent level of hitting as it would be, say, an outfielder. So it's really impressive what he's done. And he's on pace right now, if he can continue this during the last 5 weeks of the season, to get to 60 or more home runs. So we'll be following him with interest. And he's probably got a good chance, if he keeps going, to dethrone Aaron Judge as the most valuable player in the American League. The other player of noteworthy is in the National League, and that's Kyle Schwarber. He just actually hit 4 home runs last night for the Philadelphia Phillies. And he's pretty much single-handedly carrying the Phillies. Right now the Phillies are in first place in their division. And Schwarber is on pace to hit just under 60 home runs this year. And I think he's got like 110 or more RBIs, what they call runs batted in. So he's having a phenomenal year, and he's the principal reason why the Phillies are doing so well. So we'll keep a close eye on these 2 players, but they're both big candidates to be the most valuable player. So we're going to transition now to real estate. Well, our last podcast, we talked about a lot of data and trends, pricing of properties, and things of that nature that affect the success or failure of a home selling and of course, the ultimate price they get and things of that nature. And as I mentioned in my lead up and a teaser, and I'm going to correlate real estate again into life in general in the United States. And so I'll use myself. I'm a real estate broker. I've been in the business 30 plus years. And fortunately, I've been pretty successful, and I'm always very thankful of being supported by the local residents and my abilities to keep my family in a comfortable lifestyle. And at the same time, I enjoy what I do. But, because I've been doing this for 30 years, that puts us back in 1995 or earlier, and now we're in 2025. So we've gone through a lot of different cycles in real estate. So when I got into the business in 1995, prices were way, way, way lower than they are right now. And of course, it was very commonplace in Hunters Creek during that era for prices to maybe go up 2 to 4% a year. And that was considered very acceptable. We were also in Hunters Creek competing with builders because there was a lot of building going on in Hunters Creek until about 2003. So when you were selling a pre-owned home, you were competing with the builder. And so as a buyer, I'd say most customers would prefer buying a new home, all things being equal, because they get brand new stuff. They can customize the home to their own taste, their own colors. They can put in whatever updates they want. So they have total control over that. At the same time, if these buyers were comparison shopping and looking at new homes versus pre-owned homes, of course, they weren't going to buy a pre-owned home unless the pre-owned home was a lower price than the new home. And so there was obviously a spread for that. Now, this spread varies a little bit, but kind of as a frame of reference, you might say the spread between a new home and a resale home would be 10 to 20%. So at that time in 1995, 1997, whatever the case, you could buy a home in, let's say, a well-known section of Hunters Creek, for those of you that know Hunters Creek, in Callaway Cove. And Callaway Cove was a brand new section there. They started building there, I think, in 1994 and completed Callaway Cove in about 1997. And they were more upscale homes for Hunters Creek. Their square footage was a little bit larger, and the lots were a little bit bigger, and they were considered more of an upscale neighborhood. So in Callaway Cove, you would buy a home during that time frame maybe, and I'm just kind of ballparking here because it's a long time ago, maybe $2.25 to $275. So again, if you use that 10 to 20% philosophy, if you were comparing a resale home that was, let's say, in a somewhat similar section of Hunters Creek, you would be looking at maybe anywhere from a high of 245 to maybe a low of 195. So there was a significant spread. So that was one of the reasons why that kind of put a ceiling on resale prices at that time. And the reason I'm doing a little historical assessment of this is because let's bump ahead 10 years and we go in 2005 and 6. Well, in 2005 and 6, we had the most greatly appreciating 2 years in the history of Orlando real estate at that time. So prices were going up phenomenally large for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons was there were more buyers than inventory. The other reason was that a lot of unqualified buyers were getting mortgages, and that created all this buyer demand. So there was very poor underwriting practices by the lenders during that time, and also some less than quality appraisals being done in some cases. So because of that, we had a lot of unqualified buyers who were getting approved for mortgages. And ultimately what happened, if you recall, if you've lived down in Florida for 20 or less years, we had a meltdown of the market during the last year of the George Bush administration for various reasons. And we actually had a bottoming out of the market in 2010 and 11. So just to give you some frame of reference, let's say you had an upper end home in 2006 in Hunters Creek. It could have sold for probably, let's say, $700,000, give or take. Well, if you were selling that same home in 2010 or 11, it was selling for around $300,000 to $325,000. So the value during that 5 or 6 year period went down over 50%. So you can imagine if you had bought a house for $600,000 or $700,000 in 2006, and you had one of these bad mortgages. And now when you look to do something with your property in 2011, it had lost 50% of its value. You were kind of between a rock and a hard place. So that's why we had all these short sales and foreclosures, and that's why it impacted everybody that was selling homes. They all either kept their homes or took a loss on what they were selling if they had bought during this peak season. And that trend obviously slowly started reversing itself. So with the new lending oversight that President Obama put in, they eliminated a lot of these irregularities in the lending business. They eliminated a lot of the irregularities in the appraisal business. And so we started becoming gradually a seller's market. So from like 2012 on up through 2023, we were in a seller's market. And for the first few years of this, we were kind of back to what I would call normal appreciation. The houses maybe were going up 3 or 4% a year, and that was what it historically had gone on in Central Florida for years. Then right after COVID hit, for a confluence of things, we had runaway appreciation from about the latter part of, actually the first part of 2021 to the latter part of 2023. So we had about a 2.5 year period where prices were appreciating at 15 to 22%. So you can imagine, let's say you had bought a house in 2019, for argument's sake, for $250,000, and maybe you sold it in 2023, the house would probably be worth $350,000 or $400,000. So in the course of a couple of years, you could have made $100,000 to $150,000 without really having to do a lot of changes to your home. Now, if you were the kind of person that put a lot of updates in your home during that time frame, then your house was worth even more money and even more in demand. So we had a crazy run-up of prices. And then over the past year and a half, the market's been in a transition. Prices have been flat, and in some cases, they've come down a lot. The reason that I'm giving you a little historical comparison and what's going to lead into my next section is because I'm a real estate broker. So the things that I did in 1995, I'm not doing in 2025, both in terms of marketing strategies, how I recommend things to sellers, some of the techniques that I use, the increase in technology. There's a lot of things that are going on differently. So obviously, if I was still doing things exclusively from the way I did 30 years ago, I wouldn't be overly successful now. Also, let's say that something that I did that was an unsuccessful technique, if I continued to do an unsuccessful technique, I would have no success. And in other words, I'd be repeating mistakes, and for whatever my stubbornness was, I would continue to repeat those mistakes. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Like I always mention on this show, you have to be a student of history and try to learn from mistakes. Somebody that keeps repeating the same mistake over and over again, in my opinion, is not very intelligent. So I think from a common sense point of view, if something that you're doing is not working, you have to change things. And so that leads me into my third and more societal thing, and that's to do with safety in this country, and a topic that you've heard me talk about before, which is not an overly popular topic, and that's guns. We just had another gun tragedy this week I think it was in, I should know what state it was in, but I'm going to say it was either Texas or Minnesota. I don't remember which one now. And they had a gun tragedy in a church / elementary school that was conducting classes and prayer in the church. They had a well-armed person with an arsenal of weapons that didn't even come into the church. This person stayed outside of the church and shot bullets through the glass. And I think they had 2 or 3 fatalities and about a dozen or so injuries, some of a critical nature. And these were all little kids for the most part. I think there was a couple of adults that got shot and the rest were younger children. I mean, what a waste of life and what a tragedy. We always say, and you always hear politicians say, we want to improve life for our children. The safety of our children is our paramount importance. And that's why you hear all these things when the concept of abortion's talked about, which is very controversial. And I won't give a position on that. But the reason for the people that are very anti-abortion is we don't want to take human life. And I certainly understand when people talk about the sanctity of human life. On the same token, when that same philosophy, we somehow lose sight of that with guns. And, no matter how many people die from guns, we won't do anything about it. We don't make it harder to get guns. We don't have a system to put any kind of controls on guns. And I won't bore you with some of the ideas that I've had before. I just know one thing, and the facts are clear and indisputable, that our gun policy is an abysmal failure. We get desensitized to gun violence because all you hear about every week in this country is gun violence, whether it's a domestic shooting, whether it's a suicide, whether it's a mass shooting, whether it's a shooting in our schools, whether it's a shooting at a concert. There's just a variety of ways that people are senselessly getting murdered. But yet, are we doing anything about it? Absolutely not. Because our politicians know that it might be initially an unpopular policy politically if they try to put some common sense controls over how people get licensed and some different things to try to reduce the amount of senseless violence. It's clear and indisputable that the more guns you have, the more gun violence you have. I've always scratched my head, people say, well, if everybody had a gun, we wouldn't have as many gun violences. Well, that's simply ridiculous. Like in this situation with this crazed shooter that ended up taking his own life, which is what happens in most of these cases. People on site that had guns, nothing would have happened because they weren't prepared for it. You can't be prepared. You're not going to go into a church and carry an automatic weapon during a church service, etc. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so now we got our flags at half-mast, and we say our prayers and thoughts are with the victims' families and stuff. Well, that's great. That's not bringing the victim back, and it's not taking away the grief of the parents of these young children that suffered a loss of life. In my opinion, it's disgusting. And our politicians, embarrassment's too much of a word. I mean, it's too weak of a word. It's disgusting how our politicians are in the hip pockets of gun manufacturers, gun lobbies, and to a third degree, they want to make sure they keep getting reelected in this country, and especially in the more conservative states. They know that if they come out with a pro-gun approach, they're going to continue to garner a bunch of votes. And they put no value on gun safety and saving lives. But yet when the concept of abortion is brought up, for some reason they don't think that there's a correlation between being anti-abortion and being anti-guns. It's just mind-boggling to me, and it really sickens me. I lose sleep over this. I have kids, I have grandkids, and I certainly wouldn't be forgiving if any of my kids were injured in senseless gun violence. And the people in this country need to stand up and do something about it. Why should the gun manufacturers make all this money, and why should the gun lobby have this much influence? It's taken away from the safety of our country. Just like, let's say you had a friend or relative in Ukraine right now. How would you feel if the country is being invaded? You've had all these people that are defending their country die, and yet our country supposedly is kind of inferring that they're going to have to give some of their country over to the Russians in order to solve this conflict, and the Russians illegally invaded them. And they've suffered all these losses of life. These people in the Ukraine are brave and should be admired for defending their homeland. I know if somebody invaded the United States, that's when we'd say, well, we all need to be armed and we need to defend our country. The Ukrainians took the bull by the horns and sacrificed their own lives to save their sovereignty. But yet our current administration is kowtowing to Putin. I don't understand it. I have my own theories behind it, which I won't share on this show. But you need to improve the quality of life in the United States and in these foreign countries. And you need to take a stand against dictators. You need to put some common sense approaches to how people get licensed to carry weapons. And I just think people need to talk about these things. I think people have become too accepting. The common thing is, well, yeah, it's another senseless gun death. There's nothing we can do about it as citizens. And people just go on about their lives. And, you know, like recently on the news, we had a murder across the street from Hunters Creek and Courtney Chase. And they found somebody that had some blunt force trauma that was found in a vehicle. Well, I know the people that live in Hunters Creek, there's a lot of stuff online about this because they're uncomfortable that there's somebody that committed a murder across the street from Hunters Creek. And that's just one isolated incident, probably from one person that who knows why they committed this murder. But we need to do something about guns. And unless people are willing to stand up and hold our politicians and gun manufacturers accountable, nothing is going to change in this country. So that's all for today. Have a great weekend. Stay hydrated. Use your sunblock. And this is Marty Kaiser out.